Okay, so hey, I am Andrew, software engineer at Microsoft, and I'll be your instructor for this course, software engineering interview prep. So if you're targeting suite as a software engineering role at top tech companies, I would highly recommend you attend this course. This course is absolutely free. We'll cover everything from software engineering, tech interviews, to coding interviews, to system design, to go-to-market strategy. During this course, I will cover all the important topics, the most asked interview questions, and efficient ways to actually solve them. So I have more than 7 years of experience in software engineering, role at top tech companies in the United States, and I have helped a lot of candidates with interview preparations. I'm very excited to help you land your dream role. So sign up for my course, and I look forward to meeting you in the next session. Okay, so let me give you a quick intro and quick overview of HiCounselor. HiCounselor is an online career accelerator that helps job seekers find full-time job. So HiCounselor helps candidates with interview prep as well as getting the interview calls. So we utilize the AI-powered job search tool and strong network with 300 employers to help candidates land a job. So every candidate gets personal attention and mentorship from professionals like myself who come from top tech companies. So the payment structure at HiCounselor is income share agreement, where you don't pay anything to HiCounselor until you land a job. So once you land a job, that's when you pay a fraction of your first year salary in monthly installments. So there's going to be no upfront cost. If you're currently looking for a job, HiCounselor could be a great resource for you. The next cohort at HiCounselor starts very soon. So if you're interested, please apply on HiCounselor.com. Feel free to use my code Andrew, and you will get a $500 discount when you start paying HiCounselor after landing a job. So in this session, in this session, we're going to go over the most common pitfalls that I found from all the students and from everybody, including me, when I was first interviewing with companies in coding interviews. So the most common pitfalls and mistakes that candidates usually make within coding interviews as well as technical interviews. So the first one is ignoring edge cases. So make sure you write this down because it's gonna be very, very helpful rather than just staring at the screen or just listening in or even writing down in the Word document. It's actually better to write this on a paper using handwritten note, using your pen or pencil. So the first most common pitfall that I found and that a lot of candidates make is ignoring all the edge cases. So this is very common. So overlooking edge cases is a good indication for inadequate problem-solving skills. But first, your algorithm, if your algorithm doesn't handle all the valid inputs, your solution is incomplete. Also, by not considering edge cases, you miss out very opportunity to come up with a better algorithm that eliminates the edge cases. For example, if you're doing a problem of, let's say, discovering the missing number, a good solution, well, the most straightforward solution is to subtract the sum of the input array from the total sum of 1 to the n. However, for a large n, the solution might fail due to the overflow integer. So being aware of these edge cases force you to think of a better solution. And by using, let's say, a bitwise operator XOR, we can devise a solution that is no longer susceptible to overflow. So good advice and a good solution to this is use tests around boundaries of your algorithm's input. So if your algorithm fails in some of these edge cases, check first if you can fix your algorithm by introducing some quick incremental changes to it. And if you cannot, ask your interviewer whether you should handle these edge cases. If the answer is yes, you can't seem to think of anything, engage your interviewer and try to solicit their assistance to guide you in the right direction. Most of the times they'll be very helpful and supporters. All right. So the second most common pitfall is actually not using tests. So that is another big common pitfall. So not running your code through test cases is actually missing out on your in your ace in your interview. First, it's very common for the code to fail in some specific test cases. So dry running your algorithm with very few examples will allow you to spot bugs and address them early on. Also, you may come up with original solution which your interviewer hasn't thought about. So by showing with examples, concrete examples, how each variable is changing at every line of code, you make it much easier for the interviewer to understand that your solution actually works. So so what's the advice? What's the solution? There are a couple of places during the interview process where I usually recommend to use tests. The first is write the first section is right after the interviewer finished asking you the coding question. So you can use an example or two to verify you understood the question. So the second place you should ask a question or to use tests is after you sketched out or built skeleton of your solution. So use like a non-trivial test case to walk your interviewer through a pseudocode skeleton and to validate their correctness. The last place is once you're done writing up and implementing your code, you dry test your code again to make sure you don't have any bugs. Okay. So another The third mistake, the third common pitfall in coding interview, and this actually happens a lot, and a lot of candidates just dig through and jump to the solution without clarifying this. So you're actually trying to go solve one route, but you end up solving a totally different question. So what's the third common pitfall? Yes, question misunderstanding. So of all the mistakes, this is probably most common and also the easiest to avoid. It's quite surprising that candidates to make it, and there's really not much to elaborate here. So if you misunderstood the interview question or made some assumptions about the problem statement or input that you shouldn't have, it's likely that you'll fail your interview. So what's the solution and what's the advice? The first thing you must do always after the interviewer finishes explaining the question is to repeat it back to them, to him or her, in your own words to validate your understanding. If you got it wrong, they'll tell you, but doing a simple thing will spare you from the costly error of answering the wrong question. Again, you're going to waste your entire time if you just go forth with answering a different question. An error that we sometimes realize we've made only midstream when there's no time left to change the course. So while repeating the question, bring up a few simple examples of input and ensure that you're correct about the expected output. It'll make it easier for the interviewer to know whether you understood the question. The other thing you want to do is ask whether you can make certain set of assumptions. For example, you can ask whether you can assume the the input is valid or within a specific range, or depending on the question, ask whether the input is sorted. And lastly, it's also very good practice to clarify with the interviewer whether they want you to optimize for time and space. Okay. So the fourth common error is sloppy code or messy code. Sloppy, messy code, and this happens quite a few times as well. So technical interviews aren't just about correctness and efficiency, although that's the most important thing that interviewers look for. It's not the everything. It's also about your coding style. So your code may be fast and bulletproof, but if it's only you that can comprehend the code base, good luck getting the offer. So hiring managers, they look out for engineers whose code is legible, maintainable, and idiomatic. Code that other team members can pick up from where you left off. So the issue is very prevalent among beginners, language switchers, and competitive programming participants, because they tend to skip clean coding style. And here are some styling mistakes you should definitely avoid. Giving random and non-descriptive names to variables, functions, etc. Some basic examples. Using single character names for non-index variables. Or calling your function func competitive program developers, especially need to be careful here because they're used to using super short names in the programs in order to code faster. This will not work in tech interviews. Another bad example is inconsistent coding style. While everybody has their own style of programming and we should accept it for what it is, mixing random coding standards is never a good idea. It signals sloppiness and messiness. For example, using different naming conventions or using tabs in some parts of code and not in the other places. It could be either a, similarly, if you put braces on the same line, don't later don't later put them in a new line. Other examples abound, but this is the general mistake. Using also another bad example is using defensive coding, such as null checks and lots of special cases without really stopping to think about whether they were necessary. This leads to more complicated code that is hard to understand and debug. So what's the general guideline? What's the general solution? So use common sense to give descriptive names where applicable, and choose a single coding standard and stick to it. And you want to make your code idiomatic. Otherwise, it may raise red flags, and your interviewer could start doubting your proficiency in the coding language that you chose for the interview. So 3 things. Don't do defensive coding, have a consistent coding style, and have descriptive names for functions, methods, and variables and classes. So this avoids sloppy code. Okay, I'll give you 1 or 2 minutes to think about it, and then we're gonna move on to the 5th common pitfalls. We're gonna come back. Okay, we're back. So let's look at the fifth most common pitfall. So it's actually the poor command of programming language. So you may have a great problem-solving skills in algorithmic thinking, but that won't be enough if you don't know the core constructs, functionality, and syntax of your programming language. So to clarify, nobody expects you to remember by heart the interface of some, some complex data structure that is used once in a blue moon. So it's perfectly fine to Google the answer in this case. We can all do that. But if you're struggling with the elementary things like, memory management in C, inheritance in Java, list comprehensions in Python, or closure in JavaScript, then that's a non-starter. While this is a mistake that typically beginners do, it also exists amongst academics who have deep theoretical knowledge, but scant hands-on engineering experience. So the fifth most common pitfall is poor command on the language, programming language. So what's the advice? So if you have the option, always interview in your strongest language, programming language. So interviewers are often flexible, and actually they're all very flexible when it comes to their programming language, and they will allow you to choose the programming language you want to interview in. So if that's not the case, for instance, if you're interviewing for a front-end position where JavaScript is required, so do yourself a favor and brush up on your programming language before the interview. So learning from books will not cut it, and you need to get your hands dirty. Programming a few projects, get on some exciting GitHub projects, contribute to open source products, and better yet, do all of them. So So learning by doing is really, truly the only way to go about mastering a programming language. So if you're actually, lacking some ideas for what to do for programming projects, here are some starter ideas for beginners, including what I also was inspired by when starting a project. So, so number one, build a working chess game. It's always a fun product for getting your hands dirty on a certain programming language. Create a simple application. Make like a random number generator. Using Python, build web scraper. Design a small JavaScript game. Maybe redesign an existing web page template. or start a multi-page responsive website. So these are all good starters for project ideas. So another common mistake that a lot of candidates make is being too quiet throughout the interview. So interviewers are not, they're not God, and they cannot read your mind. You might be anxious and your thoughts aren't particularly coherent, but if you cannot muster the courage to talk, forget about passing the interviews. It's not sufficient to explain your approach to solving a problem you're given at the beginning of an interview. You're expected to communicate at all stages, including during the implementation and testing of your actual algorithm. So what's the general guidelines? It's a common cognitive bias to exaggerate the extent to which our thoughts are apparent to others. So err on the side of over-communicating. Okay, so while performing a task, walk your interviewer through your steps and reason. Talk about and coding at the same time doesn't come naturally to many of us. And fortunately, there are resources that can help you practice these things. So if it's anxiety that you feel prevents you from verbalizing your thoughts effectively, you may want to try these different techniques to calm yourself down. So a good resource I recommend is called www.print.com. So this is a good tool, actually quite a useful tool for helping you practice talking and coding at the same time, so that it becomes natural to you. Okay, so what is the last common pitfalls in the programming technical interviews? And it is by far jumping to the code before sketching out the solution. So diving into writing code before fully thinking about the solution is a recipe for disaster. The problem with half-baked solution is that by the time you realize that what you're trying to do is too complicated or doesn't work, you run out of time. So whether it's the nerves or overconfidence that makes you rush into implementation, hold them. You're likely to do more harm than good if you think you can figure out the solution as your code. So this hardly ever ends well. So what's the advice? Start by explaining your thought process Think out loud about how to break the problem down into simpler pieces. And when you're ready to begin, write the pseudocode down. To clarify your approach. So along the way, use examples to spell out key steps in your algorithm. So only after both you and the interviewer agrees upon, have a consensus upon the good solution, proceed to the implementation. So the design and discussion should always come before the implementation, not as you go or after. You should also mention the brute force and naive solution early on before you're writing anything. There are several reasons. Number one, it helps you avoid any awkward silence moments while you're still trying to figure out the optimal solution. Secondly, a brute force solution can sometimes lead to an optimal one by optimizing the parts of it. So as an engineer, your prime directive and goal is to code a solution which works. So correctness takes precedence over everything else, including efficiency. So these are, there are many mistakes. There are many common pitfalls for beginners in the coding interviews in a technical setting. But these are the most common pitfalls, and those were jumping quickly to implementation before designing the solution, a lack of command on the language, being too quiet throughout the interview, ignoring all edge cases, not utilizing tests, misunderstanding the question, and messy code. So I recommend that you study these common pitfalls again and make sure you understand and comprehend, and have it in your habit so that it becomes second nature to avoid those. Now, I want to thank you for your attention and participation. Again, if you need assistance with your job search, HiCounselor could be a great resource for you. So the payment structure at HiCounselor is income share agreement, where you don't pay anything to HiCounselor until you land a job. So once you land a job, you pay a fraction of your first year salary in monthly installments. So there's going to be no upfront payment. All of my technical sessions and coaching sessions are based off my experience with interviewing for companies like Microsoft, LinkedIn, Google, Apple, Stripe, Amazon, Tesla. The list goes on and on. I have interviewed for almost all of the big tech companies. So these are coming from real life experiences of technical interviews. So the next cohort at HiCounselor starts very soon. So if you're interested, please apply on HiCounselor.com. Feel free to use my code Andrew, and you will get a $500 discount when you start paying HiCounselor after landing a job. I'm going to see you at the next session. Okay, thanks so much.